So Gaurav, thank you so much for doing the interview with us. Can you tell us, who you are, what your background is a little bit?
Yeah, thanks, Langdon. First of all, great to be here. Definitely a unique situation for me to be in this bright red car on a sunny day here in Amsterdam.
It's gorgeous out, isn't it?
This is actually quite amazing.
You can see the clouds in the sky.
That is indeed true. What's the theme this time? Isn't it like let Kubernetes bloom or something?
Oh, that rings a bell. Yeah.
But sorry, back to your question. So I'm Gaurav Rishi. I'm the VP of Product and look at cloud native partnerships here at Kasten by Veeam, if in case people can see the logo out here. Mm-hmm. So very much looking forward to this.
Okay. So what does that mean that you kind of do? Obviously, I think a lot of people are familiar with kind of helping to drive product, but what does the kind of partnership side mean to you?
This is super exciting for me because living inside the cloud native ecosystem, what, first of all, we as a company, Kasten by Veeam, do is three key use cases. One is we do Kubernetes application backup and recovery. Mm-hmm. We do disaster recovery, and we do application mobility. I can explain each one of them. But to get any of these things going, you need to sort of work in the ecosystem. You need to make sure you're working with the storage partners so you can actually back up your data. You need to make sure that you're working with all of the Kubernetes distributions so that people have their freedom of choice, whether it's managed services or whether it's on-premises self-managed like OpenShift,
right.
As well as you need to work in the context of security because backup turns out to be your last line of defense. And so that's super critical too. So that's really going ahead and making sure we can make all of these technology pieces come to life in a way that makes it super simple for people and getting all the companies to work together. So that's really a part of my job while we help define the product and build it, which obviously the smart engineers at Kasten do.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think kind of the crux of cloud native, it's kind of true in more traditional application environments as well, but a cloud native is all about, it's kind of service-oriented architecture, right? It's all about connecting all the pieces together to actually get to where your application is going. And I think that's one of the hardest things to manage, and I think that what maybe companies like yours bring to the table, but also companies like Red Hat bring to the table is like providing me as a customer or a user like kind of a guidance on which ones work together well, which is a difficult thing to figure out on kind of your own without a lot of trial and error, which is less than fun a lot of the time.
It's interesting you say that because I actually remember blogging about this up front when I joined Kasten and the cloud native community, which was simplicity and freedom of choice. And I know it gets a little philosophical, but the point is, on one hand, you can argue that, hey, look, if you have a lot of choice, things become complex, it's hard to choose, how do you get things to work? And sometimes people can confuse that by saying, let's go restrict the choice so that it becomes sort of simple. But I think the right answer is, how do you still keep that choice, but maybe guide people so that there is indeed a way where they feel confident of being able to go ahead and pick the medium which helps meet their requirements. So I think that's very much what we do. We want people to be able to choose the best storage infrastructure, choose the best deployment model, whether it's out to the edges in the cloud, hybrid, etc. But at the same time, make sure the data has the freedom and can sort of move around, because that's very much how I think most of the deployments today are and are ramping up. So that's it's philosophical, but also very much true to what we are seeing today.
Yeah, I think we've started to hear terms like opinionated a lot, and I'm a big fan of the opinionated kind of solution that allows for change, right? Because it doesn't always fit, but at the same time, getting it kind of up and running in the way that we know kind of works the best is a lot easier starting point than having to figure out all the tools all the way along. So yeah, I'm a fan.
Yeah. No, I think simplicity is needed, and especially in this environment. I know you probably know the stats, but it amazes me every time we come for the Kubernetes event. Majority of the people are attending Kubernetes for the very first time, which means that they are actually new relatively to the ecosystem.
Right.
And so you cannot expect them to be black belts on day one. And so I think as organizations sort of scale up their workloads, they are looking for, like you said, the opinionated ways of being able to work so that they can get the advantages that Kubernetes has promised and is actually delivering,
Right.
but do it in a simple way. And that's very much, I think, how we at Kasten also approach it.
Well, I mean, even if you're in the space all the time, like keeping track of the plethora of projects is really tough, right?
Yes.
Like I was one of the other people I interviewing is actually working on the like cloud native glossary, as well as like trying to put together. There's another CNCF kind of project summary map. So to try to get make it a little clearer what really is going on.
Yeah, it might be easier to navigate the streets of Amsterdam with a cyclist than it is to at times navigate the CNCF landscape. I hear you.
I don't know if I go quite that far.
All right, okay, fine. I know I was pushing it.
It is exciting being out here.
Both are exciting, yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I totally hear you. But you do, your organization does do a fair amount of open source kind of contribution, and the project you were talking about specifically that I thought was really interesting was Navigate. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So yeah, no, I mean, to your larger point, I think we are definitely, big sponsors of not only the KubeCon type events, but also are active contributors to a variety of open source projects. So I can probably, and depending on where customers and the community members are in their journey to adopting Kubernetes, there's something that we see as a fit for them. So specifically around Navigate, which is Navi-G with a letter or a number 8 behind it, is an exciting one. And I think the thesis behind it really started was, on one hand, Helm is amazing, right? I mean, it's a collection of YAML files, helps you have these in a chart, helps you do package management, deploy applications, but it also comes with a variety of challenges, right? As your applications and your cloud native applications become more complex, to your earlier point, there are a lot more configuration parameters that you need to go ahead and set, right? And it is very easy to lose yourself into these YAML files, authoring them, and different charts and different aspects of those YAML files might not appeal to the same domain owners. So your developers might care about some configuration parameters, your operations teams might care about a different set of parameters, and things can get out of whack and complex to manage really quickly, right? And we noticed that when we were dealing with our customers. And so Kasten K10, which is our product, also is a cloud native application, and we started seeing some of those complexities ourselves too. So Navigate was born from that problem, and to see if there's a way to solve that. And so what it allows you to do is essentially gives you a simple user interface where you can go ahead and actually get your variables on one side and yeah, exactly. I was like, this is.
It's a little hard to see them when you're kind of this low.
This low on this race car. I don't know if the audience can actually see how cool the car is, but yeah, no, it's very cool. And there's the canal on this side.
Well, one of the people I interviewed earlier commented that maybe it's because I'm not like sitting low enough and like truly doing the race car experience, with their economy mode and driving on city streets. Which is probably
you should be in a bicycle here, and that's how the interview should happen.
Yeah, well, we talked about that, but have you ever seen a two-person bicycle that was not like front back, right? And then you'd also have to do all the pedaling, right? So that might be tough on the talking.
Yeah. So sorry, but no, I think we got lost in that. So yeah, so Navigate allows you to sort of very easily be able to go ahead and get a list of, think of it as values and parameters, and so you can go ahead and get your applications configured in a way where what might be the parameters, what the value for that is, set it up, and it in turn will go ahead and generate the chart for you, right? And I think that and that turns out to be something that's super useful, because once you get your perfect chart, you've got this, it's easy to understand, but then it can be reused too, and you can apply it across a variety of templates. So that's in fact how, if you were to go to install at kasten.io, for example, that's what we use under the covers to go ahead and make it easy to
design your
and
particular
configure.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, that's something that we are excited about. We are definitely seeing the community sort of saying, okay, that's interesting. And so I think events like this where we've got everybody from various industries come in and talk about it, can help sort of contribute to it and take it to the next level.
Yeah.
And there's so much more you can do, right? I mean,
Right,
whether it's
right.
about parameter validation or things of that nature, I think those are all very much a part of it. So that's what Navigate is, but
Yeah.
there are a bunch of other projects like Cubester, and we've got Cube Campus, which is a learning platform, and we've got Canister, and I'm happy to talk about that too.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think is the interesting, things like Canister or whatever, you're doing a lot of contributions to, these open source projects, and it sounds like you're contributing to them, like you're kind of creating them and contributing to them because of the need that you have, that you think others might share. So yeah, I mean, I think that's.
Yeah, so I think, you were asking me this question earlier, I know just before we hopped into the car, about, why is data protection important right now, right?
Yeah, why?
And
Basically, it's like, in Kubernetes land, right? I was, like I said, maybe not a year ago, but a year ago, right? There was not very many organizations that were offering, solutions in the, kind of backup data protection, et cetera, space. But it seemed like there are a fair number of them this year, or this, event. And so, what do you think has shown that growth, or where do you think that growth might have come from?
Yeah, so I think let me see if I can draw an analog, given that we are on a journey here. So
right.
maybe the stops to that is, so I like to joke that Kubernetes is a 8 or a 9 year young system right now. The ecosystem is still developing. The technologies are in production, but there's so much innovation still going on. So if I really had to rewind, the initial years of Kubernetes, you had this whole paradigm around, hey, pets and cattle, stateless systems, right?
Yep.
And as a vegetarian, that was not very appealing, the whole analog around pets and cattle.
An ecologist, friend of mine who was like an OpenShift advocate a long time ago, he decided that it should be ants and elephants.
Actually, yeah, I do need to meet this ecologist.
Yeah,
all right,
so,
okay. I hear you, I can empathize with
a
that.
little shout out to Steve-O on Twitter.
All right, very cool. Good job, Steve. I think that would have been a much better way to term it. But for whatever reason, that stuck, and that was a good way to start the system. You had very simple applications which didn't have state. But think about any application, whether it's your banking application, shopping cart application, you need to have state. You need to have data which is generated as a result of you shopping, or as a result of you hopefully earning money or spending money. And you need to store that somewhere. And so state is going to exist. And you have the other thing which sort of went and came alive in the cloud native development pattern, which was what we call polyglot persistence, which was essentially just a fancy way of saying a simple application under the covers uses a variety of data services, whether it's SQL, NoSQL, messaging queues, streaming databases. The point is, you have not a single relational database, which used to be in the monolith of a non-cloud native world. You now move to a cloud native application with microservices and multiple data services under the covers. So if I kind of now fast forward 10 years into the journey, we actually have databases as the most popular workload running on Kubernetes, right? So if you kind of go look at your Datadog report, which is not a survey, but actually going and looking into what's running in these containers across, a billion plus of them, it turns out that it's usually things like PostgreSQL and, Mongo and things of that nature. So that's what's happened. First of all, you've had a huge amount of state come in, and as soon as you have state, you need to make sure that you're actually able to protect yourself in case there are failures, and that could be, attacks from things like ransomware, or there could be mistakes that people made by misconfiguring, etc. And so you need to be able to go ahead and recover, and that's what brings up data protection as a here and now issue, right? That's really what's happening. And this makes me ask the question, are we lost? I see you looking at the map.
Not entirely. I just, the map wasn't kind of keeping up with where I wanted to go. So I just changed it so that it's now going to follow it a little better.
I think I recognize the street, so this is a cool place to be, actually, either which way. It's one of the major ones, there's a canal on either side.
Yeah. So I actually think this is part of my route. It's just I wasn't actually sure where the next turn was.
Okay,
So
no worries.
that was why I was checking it out. So one of the things that I actually think has also been really interesting, kind of the cloud native world, even in more traditional apps that are not actually doing kind of the real cloud native thing, the number of types of databases that is in every application is like ridiculous. Like a data, an application used to be just a relational database behind it, but now it's got some sort of name value pair NoSQL database, right?
Yeah.
It also has like a document store NoSQL database. It also has a relational database, and maybe some others.
Yeah.
And I think that's been also really interesting. So not only do you have the complexity of typical kind of data backup, but now you have to do it in like all these different ways, because all these tools they're persistent differently, and they also have different styles of as you call it. Actually, I don't know why the term never really occurred to me, but data protection is even more complex, right, than it would be traditionally, because you have so many different kind of crazy options around how that data is being persisted.
Yeah, no, I'm actually, just to build on that point, not only is data protection important because of the reasons we talked about, where you on one hand have a lot more attack vectors, and backup turns out to be your last line of defense.
Mm-hmm.
But in addition to that, the makeup of your applications under the covers have a lot of this polyglot persistence point that we were making. But when you actually look at the techniques of doing data protection, or things like being able to take backups, you can, as software developers or former software developers, I think we all love our stack diagrams and layers of operation, but you can work at the storage layer, right? So you can do snapshots. So you can work with block file or object stores and say, look, I need to go take a quick snapshot of that, and that works fine in some cases. But you also might need to go ahead and work at a layer above, which is at the database level, which we call logical backups. And the reason you might want to do that is, for some applications, it's not sufficient to get the kind of consistency a snapshot might give you, because you might have still things that are in memory, haven't been flushed out into disk. If you lose that, that could be that $1 million sale you made, and you don't want that to be lost. And so that's the reason, if you're using, for example, Postgres as a database, you might be wanting to exercise things like pgdump, which is a tool that might come with it. And to your point, because you have 300 plus databases, and that's growing actually, you have 300 different ways of being able to use these logical database tools. Yeah. So I think one of the things which we at Kasten do really well, and I can talk about what we're doing together with the community with projects like Canister in that context, is to be able to say, look, we want to give you a simple way, but still maintain that freedom of choice to be able to go pick and choose any database that solves your problem. But when it comes to backup, we'll go ahead and create these templates. We've already gone ahead and configured that under the covers. You can choose whether to use snapshot-based backups or logical database-based backups. And we go ahead and under the covers use the native tools that the database vendors at times have gone ahead and created.
Right.
And then the other sort of vector to this is also that we're seeing people employ databases in Kubernetes clusters, and then they're also using databases as managed database as a service. So think about Amazon RDS, for example, or MongoDB Atlas, and so on. And both are good, right? Depending on the needs, you might decide option A or B, and A and B also in some cases. And so you also want your backup to work across both those cases, which is what we do. And so how Canister fits in, which is again an open source project, is it gets a little more involved, and I know we are navigating through the streets here, but it's interesting because think about going ahead and doing a backup. You might have multiple replicas running. What you might want to go ahead and do is say, look, I want to have an order of operations in terms of making sure, scale it down, go act on replica number 2, make sure you use these tools. So you have pre-hooks and post-hooks in our terminology to be able to create these blueprints for certain types of databases.
Right.
And then when the time comes for recovery, these order of operations are even more important, because it might be that your application requires microservice 2 to come up only after microservice
Right,
1 has been
right.
rehydrated, right?
Right.
So what Canister allows you to do is create these blueprints, which can be extended or can be authored up front for your applications, which have under the covers various types of data services, and then be able to define these order of operations. But these order of operations also includes a call out into the database native tools like pgdump, etc.
Right.
So that it becomes super easy for you.
So do you foresee Canister as like kind of like a complete disaster recovery kind of orchestrator, for lack of a better term, or is it pretty much purely focused on data? I mean, data is obviously an important part, but not the only part of kind of a recovery scenario.
Yeah. No, so it's a great question. So I think the way we've got Canister right now and the way we envision it is essentially Canister plays a really important part in doing what I just defined, which is the blueprint aspect of it. But if you had to go ahead and think about backup and disaster recovery, there's so many other aspects that are needed. So for example, you need to go ahead and not only discover all the applications that first of all are running in your cluster, then you need to go ahead and define what should be the policies, how often should they be backed up, right? Then you need to go ahead and define, well, how long should they be kept, because you don't want to keep increasing your storage bill. You need to go and say my retention policy is 7 years or whatever, or 30 days, and after that time, go and delete it or move it from this object store to maybe a coal glacier or things of that nature. So there are all these other attributes, and so that's where we have Kasten K10 as a co-product, which does a lot of that work. But for some of the key critical tasks, it uses Canister to be able to define these blueprints.
Right.
So the problem we're trying to solve with that and strike this healthy balance is we want our partners, both system integrators as well as customers, to be able to not wait for a release from us to be able to say, hey, my applications looks like this and my order of operations need to be ABC.
Right.
Give me a new release for that. I should be able to go and work at my own pace and across my own deployment model. And so that's the way we see Canister evolving, and we keep getting it richer. And it surprises us at times, that customers and community members who've used it and built their own things and wrapped it with other kinds of scheduling algorithms, and that's all very good.
Right.
And the way we see it at Kasten K10, usage is to be able to continue to enrich it so it becomes easier for you to be able to write these blueprints as well as have them surfaced up. So it comes back to that simplicity point we started with.
So one thing I want to ask you, because you were talking about the complexity of backup and data protection, remember, is that there's this, I wouldn't say new, but it's getting more prevalent concept of like eventual consistency, and I'm curious to know, like, do some of the tools you're describing kind of help somebody solve when you have eventual consistency, like, is the data, like, how do you deal with backups and recovery and deal with the fact that it's eventually consistent?
No, so look, I mean, and this goes back to that point around you were making about databases themselves are evolving in their architecture, and not only are they segmented based on, are they columnar or are they, I mean, you're the professor, so actually, I'll leave that part to you to expand. But my point is, we see a diversity of those. But what we are also seeing hand in glove with that is operator-based patterns coming up by these database vendors themselves, who know best to go ahead and define how to do the backup based on the behavior of eventual consistency or not, right? And so I think our design and philosophical approach, I just gave a simple example of saying, hey, look, when it comes to Postgres, we could go ahead and employ pgdump.
Right.
But for example, if you take Cassandra, there is also something called K8 Sandra, which is another open source sort of operator framework which we've integrated into, that hides the complexity of being able to go ahead and work in such environments. And that's a pattern that we are seeing come up with a variety of database vendors, whether it's people like EDB or Mongo or so on.
Right.
And so that's how we expect to work at that logical level, even in this kind of environment.
Well, it's been one of the things with databases, right? Is that databases had to scale, in their like at all, right? Well before most of the rest of the software environment kind of needed to, and so as a result, database creators, like developers or whatever, like they know, for example, like the best way for their application to scale, and kind of containerization of those was often not a great idea, because you you were like kind of trying to know better than the database vendor, and so the database vendors are also now going kind of more containerized, and I think they're doing they're doing a good job of that, and this is not a fault at all. It's just that a lot of the times, particularly with something as sophisticated as data, and a database or whatever it is, it's even more important to rely on the authors of that software system to kind of tell you how to
That's
work
exactly
with
right.
it.
That's exactly right.
Because like at the end of the day, Apache, or HTTPD, right, it's a pretty simple system. I mean, it's a really good piece of code and all that other stuff. But like at the end of the day, it doesn't, you can kind of just start it and stop it, right? Whereas a database has so many other kind of moving parts. And I think that's like your philosophy is a good one, where you're kind of saying, okay, we hope that you as the author of this software know the best way to provide the data, and then we can go off and do what we do well, which is the the kind of backup and restore and all that jazz. But the detail is like separation of concerns, where hey,
that's exactly the
you folks know this part well, and we know this part well. Let's work it together instead of trying to take over.
Yeah, and I think there's another sort of bridging open source project, which probably is worth mentioning too, which is Copia. So, data movement, once you've got the backup process, etc., you've got some things in, so your persistent volume, you need to usually move them somewhere so that it's more than just a snapshot, because that's a bad idea for a backup. Your storage system can fail and so on. So typically people would go ahead and say, look, let me go ahead and make sure I take a backup, whether at the storage layer or at the logical level, but then move all of that content for safeguarding purposes using what we call the 3-2-1 rule, right? Which is like 3 copies, 2 different types of media, 1 offsite, so that you can protect yourself. And now you need to go ahead and do a lot of work to make sure you are efficiently and securely moving that data out into that place, which typically turns out to be an object storage location, and at times it's increasingly in the clouds, right? Whether it's a blob store on the Azure side or whether it's S3, etc. And so in that context, we've also been contributing a lot in what we call Copia, which is a data mover, and that's really interesting as a project too. And that's sort of built on the serverless design type principles, and that's quite interesting as an innovation project also that started many years ago actually, and now it's obviously in production with some of the world's largest companies using that as a result of using Kasten. And I think that's another interesting hand-in-glove project between what we see with Canister and Copia as you sort of evolve towards this data protection journey, right? So, so I think just to complete the analog, I mean, as you come into KubeCon, if you've come in for the first time, we've got open source sort of initiatives like Kube Campus, where you can come and learn. In fact, there was a lab yesterday where a ton of people had signed up. You could go ahead and just learn about Kubernetes, right? No strings attached. It's a way of sort of giving to the community, making sure they're educated, and that's a great initiative. The second one is like, let's say you've gone ahead and started creating your first few applications. You run into some of these practical problems we were talking about with things like Helm. You've got projects like Navigate. Now let's say you've gone ahead, been able to deploy those applications, things are working fine. What we've also realized is people come and say, hey, well, I need projects, and I'll put a plugin for another one, which is Kubester, which is our way of going ahead and saying, well, I don't know, there's so many different storage environments in my little cluster or in my set of clusters or hybrid environments. Can something go ahead and figure out what are these different storage environments there, first of all, just the auditing aspect and discovery aspect. Once I've got that going, can you go ahead and sort of just make sure that they are actually okay with being able to go ahead and do things like backups? Do they even support the snapshot APIs, that some vendors don't support even today, the legacy ones, though of course that's quite corrected at this point of time, or other right drivers installed and things of that nature. So in that context, you also want a tool which can not only discover your environment, but can go ahead and validate that you can actually have all of these pieces in, and then maybe run some performance tests. Maybe it's an FIO or something, right? Just to get that. And that's exactly what projects like Kubester do for the environment. And then once you've got that in, I think data protection comes in next as a stop so that you have your last line of defense. And having said that, sounds like we've reached stop.
We've gotten to the end of our journey.
So the last line of defense. There you go.
Thank you so much for being here. We really like doing these. We think they're fun. Hopefully the driving was not too harrowing for
No,
you.
this is a fantastic car, and the city is obviously beautiful and good company. So thank you very much. And I can talk about data protection for a long time. So so I know you. I know you want to stop.
When you get into a space, you're always like, there's so much more we can talk about.